At number 5, another guy that I don't think is going to get talked a lot about, Charles Harris out of Missouri. He's got great size. He's coming in at 6'3", 255 for a defensive end. Good stats, 7 sacks, 18.5 tackles for losses last year, 56 total tackles, 10 quarterback hits. So kind of add that to the 7 sacks. So he's obviously active in the backfield for that Missouri defense that was stressed all season long because of the ineptitude of their offense. His stats were weighted a little bit towards lesser opponents, but he was in a tough situation, and he regressed as the season went on. So those are really the negatives for Charles Harris, but I think he's probably the 5th best guy coming back. At number 4, I have Marquis Haynes out of Ole Miss. He's a little bit undersized at 220 down there on that end. That's really more of a weak side linebacker size at 220. But he performed like he weighs 240 or 250. 10 sacks, 16.5 tackles for loss, 43 tackles, 2 pass breakups, 8 quarterbacks hit, 3 forced fumbles. I love it when you have a defensive end who has that stat line across the board. Very active in that defense. And like I said, with DJ Jones, with the loss of Kimdichie and a couple other star defensive players at Ole Miss, this year could be another explosive stat season for him. He got stronger as the season went along, and he was better against better competition, which is something that really impresses me. At number 3, probably a little controversial here, I have Jonathan Allen from Alabama. He could easily be 1 or 2, but I have him at 3. He's got great stats, 12 sacks last year, 14.5 tackles for losses, 4 pass breakups, 6 quarterback hits, and 2 forced fumbles. Again, another stat line that's complete across the board. Does everything well. He was extremely consistent last year, which really impresses me. Better stats on losses, which means that he plays better when his other teammates don't play as well. Again, speaking to that consistency for Jonathan Allen. Of course, he was on the line with Ashawn Robinson. I think he was overshadowed a little bit by that great Alabama defense. And he had better stats against quality opponents, which is something I look forward to. So I think he's the 3rd best. At number 2, I've got Derek Barnett from Tennessee. Might be a little bit higher, 1 or 2 spaces higher than a lot of people rank. But I got to see him last year, and I really know what he meant to that defense last year. Great numbers, 10 sacks, 12 tackles for losses, 69 tackles, the most tackles of any of the elite defensive ends. So to me, defensive end, I think people really weight the sack stat. A defensive end still has to protect against the run. He still has to maintain that position on the end against the cutbacks, against the great running backs in this conference. So I think that 69 tackles shows how complete of a defensive end Derek Barnett is, which is what gives him, to me, the nod above a Jonathan Allen or a Marquis Haynes, is that 69 tackles. Again, a complete stat line, some pass breakups, some quarterback hits, some forced fumbles. He got better as the season went on, was very quiet against the out-of-conference opponents, did not rack up a lot of stats against the North Texases of the Tennessee schedule. Very consistent and played best against top opponents. So I have Derek Barnett at number 2. And at number 1, I have Myles Garrett from Texas A&M. His stats are incredible. 12.5 sacks, 19.5 tackles for losses, 59 tackles, 2 pass breakups, 10 quarterback hits, 5 forced fumbles, 1 interception, and a block kick, and a partridge and a pear tree to go along with that. The most complete stat line you could ask for from a defensive end. And what I will tell you is it kind of misleading, and I almost bumped him down to 2 or 3. If you take a deeper look at his stats, he has a 2-to-1 ratio with tackles, or a 2-to-1 stat ratio, tackles for losses, and sacks in wins versus losses. As Myles Garrett goes, so does the A&M team. He's probably the most important player on that team from last year. When he plays well, they win. When he doesn't, they lose. He needs to be more consistent. He padded his stats. He had 6 of his 12.5 sacks against out-of-conference and non-P5 teams. So he kind of padded. He played a little bit better against weaker competition, and he started to fade a little bit as the season went along. So there are some deficiencies in Myles Garrett's game, but that stat line of his kept him at number 1 instead of me bumping him down 2 or 3. Just an incredible stat line. Dave, what about you?
I'll start with number 5. Carl Lawson. He missed all of 2014 with any injury, 6 games last year. In order for him to stay on this list, and the reason I listed him, he has to stay healthy. But when he is healthy, he's a monster on the field. He said he's matured as a football player. He's changed his approach in the offseason as a result, of him being injured. He's no longer lifting weights or running all the time. So instead he spends time now stretching and doing yoga. So I've done some reading on him, especially from SEC media days, and that's the stuff he says. He's taking a different approach. He has shown talent as a pass rusher, but only 5 career sacks. But like I said, a lot of that is to do with him being injured. Had 1 sack and 3 tackles for a loss in 7 games last year. A sack and 2 tackles for loss coming in the opener against Louisville last year. When I'm telling you, when he was in that game, he was a difference maker. So if he has to stay healthy, that is the big question. If so, he's the type of edge rusher that can just take over a game. Number 4, I have Derek Barnett from Tennessee, 6'3", 265. I love the size. And Mike, you alluded to his stats: 20 sacks, 33 tackles for loss, and 141 tackles for his career. It's crazy. And he was one of just 5 SEC players and one of 4 SEC linemen to record at least 10 sacks last season. So, like you said, the stats are there. He can. I mean, he's disruptive. That's as simple as I can put it. He does a nice job of setting the edge against the run when he needs to, but it's what we probably will see at the next level is him being a 3-4 outside linebacker type. But right now, I think you could line him up anyway. You could line him up at edge right now if you had to, as an outside linebacker if Tennessee really wanted to change some things up. But he's just going to be best just setting the edge right now as with a down technique and just go get the quarterback. Jonathan Allen, I have number 3 from Alabama, 6'3", 294. A lot of people thought he would turn pro after last year, but he stayed for his senior year. But he probably needed to become a better player. He led the tie with 12 sacks last year, but he was also his best in big games, as 11 of his sacks came against ranked opponents. I want to see how he bounces back from a shoulder surgery this past spring. He'll be categorized as a defensive end, but he can play interior if he needed to. Bottom line is he's a good player no matter where he ends up. He's a big, strong technician. He knows what he's doing. He doesn't just go out there and try and overpower everybody. He goes out there, he works on his craft, he can work on it some more, and he'll be a high NFL pick. I had Charles Harris from Missouri, a pretty bit higher. I think he's possessed the speed and ability to disrupt the backfield on any given play. He primarily lines up on the right side of the defensive end, but he'll occasionally stand up and rush from a 2-point stance if he has to. A variety of pass moves. Another guy that works on his craft. He knows what he's doing. It's not just I'm better than you. It's he'll put his whole repertoire out there and get to the quarterback. Opponents have to adjust their protections for him to focus on him. So it's however, like Mike, like you said, he still manages to be disruptive, but he does need to show better in big games and try not to fall off as the year goes on. Number 1, I guess it's no surprise, Myles Garrett. He'll be probably all of our number 1. Might be the best pure pass rusher in all of college football. Definitely be a top pick in a 2017 draft. But he probably get a bit better against the run. That's another knock on him. Mike had a couple of knocks on him too, but a lot of those things are nitpicking. So yeah, Myles Garrett number 1, and to see if that Texas A&M defense can take the next step.
That's going to be the biggest key, I think, David, going into this fall, is how much of an improvement did Chavis make with this Texas A&M defensive front in the offseason. We know we talked about this before on the show, about the fact that he came out in spring and made that guarantee that, hey, they were going to be better. And what he was specifically talking about was rush defense. And look, if you go back and you look at the numbers since they've entered the SEC, after that first year, they have completely just fallen off, and it's been the worst rushing numbers in the SEC year in and year out as far as giving up yardage. And so even getting close to that 3,000 rushing yard mark, that's embarrassing if you're an SEC defensive type of team. But I think with the hiring of Chavis, and we've talked about this too, we're going to see the transition from a Big 12 type of defense to an SEC defense where we've got some lockdown. You're going to see a lot of pressure up front, constantly coming edge rushers, things of that nature. And you've got 2 bookends there with Deshaun Hall, and of course you got Mack and those guys that are doing their things well. So my top five going in, this was a little bit different, take, but my number five this year, and it's a guy I think that's going to absolutely explode this year. He had 8 sacks to finish out the year, and it was against SEC play, and it was during the month of November. That last month, he absolutely exploded, and that's Dietrich Wise, and he didn't even start, guys. This guy didn't have a start last year, but that being said, he came in and had 8 sacks coming off the edge. Doesn't have those big stellar tackle numbers, but as a guy with the tandem that they're going to have this year and the depth they're going to have with what he's going to have on the opposite side of him, I think he's going to have a big year. So Dietrich Wise at number 5. Marquis Haynes, man, I agree with you. A little undersized, but he's fast. The guy is so quick, and I think he makes up for what he doesn't have in size. He makes up for it in speed. And having that type of speed is really what makes a difference, and what's made a difference for Ole Miss the last several years is that their defensive front has been pretty quick, and they're pretty salty. So that makes up for it. I think Marquis Haynes at number 4. Number 3, Jonathan Allen. No surprise there. Deciding to come back, foregoing the NFL draft, making that decision I think was huge for this Alabama defense. Now they've got a pure leader up front. You're going to have guys like Deshaun Hand that are going to be right there beside him. That guy, I'm looking forward to having a big year. Tim Williams, Reuben Foster, all those cats that are around them. That defensive unit, last year probably could have went down as one of the best in college football history, but this year it's a reload process, and they have some inexperience, but I think you're still going to see a lot of quality production out of that Alabama defense, enough that they are going to be in the chase for the SEC Western title. Then you jump up, and I'm going Derek Barnett at number 2. Look, man, I expect with the hiring of Shoop that this defense is going to take a massive step forward. And I expect them to be a lot more aggressive physically than they have been previously. I think that's just kind of his personality. At the point of contact, man, you're going to hear some pads clapping, and I'm looking forward to it. This is going to be an exciting transition to watch under Shoop, and I'm really excited to see what happens. But I think he's going to have a big year. We've all been kind of patiently waiting for Barnett to have that moment, and I think that this is going to be it under Shoop. I think he can deliver. Number 1, Myles Garrett. Again, we agree all on the fact, he's just an absolute phenom athletically coming off the edge. He's got those long, long arms. They're almost – you can scratch his kneecap standing up. And that's not being funny. That's being literal. This guy's got some very long arms. And then you put on the opposite side, you got Deshaun. You got Hall on the opposite side. Then you've got Kingsley, and you've got turnaround, and you've got this monstrous defensive front. Now, outside of those front 4 guys, how much depth they have, I'm not entirely sure about. I think that there's some inexperience there. They've got some guys that are going to have to step up, Kingsley being one of those guys that kind of got in the rotation a little bit. Dalen Mack, as a freshman, had to play, so that tells you about their depth. Not that Dalen Mack was just so much of a stud, but they just didn't have the type of talent that he did as a freshman. So that kind of tells you a little bit, alludes to what their depth is going to look like. Then with the transition of the lack of linebacker depth, and that's going to be an issue for them as well. So people are going to be gunning for Garrett. That being said, can they stop him? Everybody tried to gun for, when the lights were on, and we saw Jadeveon Clowney's last year at South Carolina. People criticized him, but people actually got to see when the spotlight was on and the camera was on him for an entire game. People actually got to see how ugly it is to play the defensive end position. People are going to be sending chip blocks. He's going to get doubled. It's just going to happen. Myles Garrett this season, he is my number 1, but I think it's going to be a lot tougher for him. And those other 3 guys on that defensive front are definitely going to have to get some pressure in order for him to have the success that he's been having because people are going to make those type of adjustments.